Hello, ADC 2020. My name is Chase. Thank you so much for the opportunity of doing this talk. This is using adaptive composition techniques with Elias for games. I'm a video game composer. I've been working in the industry for about 9 years, and I've shipped about 19 titles in that time. My score for I Can't Escape Darkness was nominated in 2016 for Best Artist of the Year by VGMO, and also scored the visual novel Reality and the most acclaimed soundtrack in game notification thus far is Aground, which shipped this year in April 2017. But today I'm here to talk to you about the semi-new audio middleware, Elias. It's kind of the new pro on the block, if you will. Now, Elias is similar to kind of what the audio middleware of Wise and Fmod, whereas in you would take anything that you make in your music creation software DAW, such as Cubase or Reaper or Ableton, write that, export most stems that you have in your arrangement, and then design or arrange anything else that you're doing into that program there for it to talk to the game engine in the end. And that's kind of typically how the music gets played in that format. Whereas if you can align to certain mechanics that are happening in the game or anything else creatively that you and the development team have come up with. So I want to kind of go over a process that typically will start within the music creation software before we get to Elias. And I think this is very important to cover. You have two options of writing that you typically want to do. You can write in a vertical form, adding the such layers in between one another, adding things in and out from top to bottom, or you can do a horizontal form, which is a long linear fashion with different types of song forms as you wish to weave in and out of one another. I believe that both are paramount to the design of writing in this format first before you go into Elias. And I'm going to show you that a little bit later on. So one of the cool features that Cubase actually covers is an arranger track. And the arranger track is a tool that you can utilize to pre-plan some of the stems and typically how you think that the music will work in the end result before you even get to the end process. So just a bit of a demonstration, I have a certain chunk of music that I've already written. And what I do is I create the arranger track, I stretch out the actual bar length of the section of music that I want it to play. And then I create another part of that and I limit it to that part of the section, and then I create a different part, and then I label it so that I know specifically if this is my B section of the music, that is what is going to play. And labeling this early in the design and music creation process is imperative as well, because you don't want to be confused later on of what section is which and where these variations may or may not come from. And so if I have a C section, then I know that the C section is obviously different from the B section of the music that you are writing. You also can use markers for this, and that also helps, but the arranger track is a little bit more powerful. And in this next slide, I'm going to explain a little bit why. Right now we're playing the intro. The arranger track, once you enable it, will set and just play up to that part that you had designed with that marker block. As soon as this section is done, you'll see it move to the B section, which is what is labeled as in the arranger. And when that section is done, we'll jump to the A prime. And back to the intro. So this gives you an idea, like I said, to pre-plan and see what is possible to actually do in Elias ahead of time. So it will help with the thinking, and you don't have to figure out too much brain work that you may have to expand for when you're doing these development cycles. A tip I want to share with you is to copy your full arrangement over in Cubase. So you're basically duplicating it so that you're not tampering with the arrangement itself. Even though most DAWs are non-destructive in audio, meaning if you were to delete something or truncate something, you can always pull that back out. But I found that it kind of just separates your full arrangement. Maybe if you're releasing a soundtrack or streaming, and then you have your game loop for maybe a different section that you and the development team have discussed that may happen. And then you duplicate it again for just most of the adaptive stem exportations, which we'll talk about in the future. But this is really good because then you don't have to truncate and remember which part you muted, and it just kind of keeps things a little bit more clear, concise, and organized. And when you do that, you're able to kind of put aside the mutes that you need to for having at least a 1-bar tail for exporting your stems. And this is very important as we move into the implementation phase for Elias. You want to have that 1-bar tail so that you don't have any overlaps. And the way that Elias works is it kind of picks up on tonal transients and is very smart with the system to smoothly transfer and mix those stems that you have seamlessly. And if you have that 1-bar tail, you avoid any type of feedback or system glitches that may occur within the software. And so I'll give you a brief demonstration of what that's like. Now, of course, this is indicative of what type of music that you write. So something a little bit more fast-paced. You can have like a 1-bar tail, or it depends on the reverb and the delay that you've written into your composition. I have some examples later on, whereas I actually had to have a 2-bar tail because it was a little bit more extrapolated with the ambient composition that I had written. Another tip and imperative point that I want to mark now is organize your folders. This is really important because, like I was saying earlier, if you're getting into the process of the file conventions that you need to put forward now, you will avoid any confusion for yourself or for the development team in the future. So this means not only in the music creation software that you're using, but externally in your file format convention settings, this is how everything is going to be found. And if you change anything, you're just going to have some big headaches later down the line. So just get in the routine early to organize your folders, making sure that you're labeling everything consistently and keeping it very clean. So now we're into Elias, and the couple things that we definitely need to focus on is the theme settings. The theme settings is important to set up because this is how your stems that we've exported are going to play back. And if you set this up early, you won't have any confusions later on of why things aren't really matching or lining up appropriately. You're going to want to name your theme. In this case, I named the theme Angantra. I set it to 16 bars. You need to be cognizant of the bar types that you've already written beforehand, which is why we discussed the arrangement track earlier. And if you have a bunch of 8-bar settings for those chunks that are going to align to those events, then you'll typically just put 8 bars. But if you have a longer section, say 16 or 32 bars, this is where you need to put this in Elias and break that down into the multiples that align with that number. So in my case, I wrote the longest piece in the music, which is 16 bars, but I know that groups of 8 will equal that, or groups of 4, or multiple chunks of 2, anything that are aligning within those multiples of that number, so that the transitions later on will align very smoothly. The time signature is a no-brainer. This thing I would mention now is that this current version of Elias, which I'm using, Elias Studio 3, does not work well with Mixmeter or odd time signatures that you can mix and match later on just yet. There's a little bit of creativity, which I will mention a little bit later on, that you can get around. But if just to kind of keep the simplicity of this demonstration right now, we're just going to keep it to 3/4 and keep it there. And then, of course, your BPM, so that things are obviously in time with everything that you've written. So one thing that we need to get together right now is the terminology of what Elias calls levels. I want you to start thinking about this further as stem triggers. And stem triggers are obviously what you've already exported, and this is typically how you will be thinking going forward to do the implementation. Notice how I mentioned very early in the talk about doing a vertical versus horizontal type of mentality or composition writing style. And this software utilizes both if you're thinking in that way that I usually do. And I found this to be a little bit more easier on the brain to arrange and align certain mechanics that you can be more creative with versus just trying to think in a different opposite form that really wasn't as efficient as it could be. So again, levels are now the stem triggers. The top area that I think we'll show a little bit soon will be the instruments specifically, and then each level is the arrangement that's going to play based off of what you want it to happen in the game. I'll explain. Let's do a test run, and I will do a little bit of orientation above it. Right now, we just have the guitar playing on this level. This means that in this player of the game, part of the game, you're in this specific area that this part of the music will play. As we transition, this is a different area. As we transition again, this is a different part. Notice the arrangement of things fading in and out, whereas in you have a different part of the area of the game. Likewise the same, a little bit more subdued, but this gives you an idea of how many different parts of variations and expansions you can do based off of just what you wrote in whatever composition form you decided. Notice that the guitar isn't playing on this layer, it's only the charango, the dulcimer, and then the sub bass along with a couple other instruments. And that is a dry test run of what you want to try to accomplish, just to get everything, making sure your stems are transitioning properly, making sure that you have the arrangements creatively designed as you wish, depending on what events are going to happen in the game and how things are going to move in and out of one another, which I think brings me to the ebb and flow. This is I also think, a very imperative part of the software, which is the transition presets. You can align this to name with whatever theme that you already have set up, but it's very important to understand that those will go with the themes itself, because this is typically how the fades and the system, the specialty and the magic of the system actually works. So in this case, I named the transition preset theme Engantre as well to align with that. You can do different agility settings. It has anything from any time to custom bar setups, custom beat setups. In this case, I didn't want to have that beat setup or bar setup. I just want it to happen, transition anywhere, because it's more of like a 3D playing field. And I'm trying to anticipate the ambiguity of maybe what the player may or may not do, which is tough in its own. The fade settings specifically are really what drives the system forward in terms of the fluidity of it all. And so you have milliseconds, you transfer into at least 12 seconds, 10-ish seconds for the crossfade, and about 19 seconds for the fade out. The level strategy will do a fade or a trigger for this specific setting based off of what is above in the vertical format of your arrangement. Your pickup beats are as suggested, meaning it's 1 bar or 2 bar, whatever design pickup you as you wish. The progression mode is one of the very big highlights, I believe, of Elias, because you have 3 different settings, which is a random, a sequential, and a shuffle. The shuffle will go through all your settings that without making sure that it plays every part of your arrangement or variation and make sure it's used. So nothing is played twice. Random may get twice as it suggests. And sequential will just go in the order of however you designed it in your loop tracks that was there before. And then you have a stinger strategy, which we'll discuss briefly. And let's see how this transition settings theme actually works. I'm going to play it once without it and then once with. Now we'll play with the transition preset. And notice how different that transition preset was with it on versus off. It's a little bit more smooth, a little bit more tight, and adds that glue. So I've got a couple more examples in different composition styles aside from the one I've already demonstrated. And this one, I wrote more of like an upbeat theme with a lot more variations that are going to happen. And typically this is for the game that I scored earlier this year called Potions Please, whereas you're in a 2D type of game playing field, not in a 3D space, but you have 3 different areas that you will be encountering. So you can be outside, you can be in a mini game, and you can be interior making the potions as you were to do. So I'm going to play this little demo here, and you'll get an idea of what all that music sounds like with all its things that I've discussed previously. So I said that I would mention the stinger before, and in that example, you would hear like a wind type of breeze that would occur, and that was themed to align with when you would transition from obviously the interior or the exterior or into the mini game to smooth over the transition in itself, just to kind of bridge the gap and create more of that glue. I've got another example here. In this case, this is it's still for the same game, but it's a little bit different in terms of the composition style, but with the same themes and objectives as before. Basically showing the composition from Cubase in its entirety from the arrangement. And then into Elias itself. And transitioning seamlessly into a different part of the game, which in this case is the mini game. And seamlessly into the interior. Now for this example, it's a little bit more aggressive. I was doing a demo pitch for a game and decided to utilize the stem chunks rather than the individuality for variation purposes. So I just kind of wanted to capture what it would be like because I didn't have access to the project in terms of how it would actually align to the mechanics if I were to work on the project. So I just want to give a brief example of this. My thought process here was that as each turn, the stems would be triggered to a different composition part. And this is really just pushing the system to see like what it can do in terms of the composition pieces that you can write for it and what other things it will open up in terms of creativity wise, at least for myself. Lastly, for one of the example is the ambient piece I think I was speaking about earlier, whereas I got to really test it in the engine and align it to the player mechanics based off of the control system. In this case, it's a space tactic game, so I wanted it to be transformative in terms of when the player is moving in tactic versus strategy thinking mode and then into combat mode and how that would actually work. So I'm testing it right now to get an idea of what it's like with the variation of chord progressions. And this is where I had to do that 2-bar exportation of the detail. The music changed there based off of that player movement. and a smooth transition out of combat mode back into strategy mode. When you're all done with your arrangement in the Elias, you just want to make sure that you're exporting the delivery. You can set it up to be a zip file, or you can do some naming of the tracks. I don't really suggest this, or unless you and the team have come up with a file convention system that is ubiquitous or more of like in line of what you've decided beforehand, because Elias will come up with errors and you don't want to have any of those. The less bugs, obviously, in the development cycle, the better. You can set up your XFile format to OGG if you're exporting to like mobile for a smaller, concise, but still good quality file format in terms of space for the overall entire game, or you can keep it as such. It will say unchanged, which if you exported WAV files into the Elias system software setting, you will just be using those and exporting those out into an audio different folder. Of course, setting your bit rates to any type of format that you want within OGG ranges that it offers, and then hitting save, making sure, I don't have this up here, but just want to point it out that you're saving to your streaming assets folder that you've probably already set up if you're using the demo of Elias, at least to test out streaming assets folder within your Unity project as such, because that's how the Unity project will find the actual container and your files. So in conclusion, I just want to go over a couple things like I was saying before. You got a lot of options to write in Elias, thinking in a vertical versus horizontal form, or in both, because you probably will have to eventually conflate that style once you're working in that software. But it's relatively easy and pretty easy and simple to use to get started. Using Cubase Arranger, if you use Cubase, obviously this may not apply to most of you, but if you have that opportunity, I highly encourage you to do such so that you can get a head start on what the end product will most likely sound like. Exporting with a 1-bar tail for certain composition styles as such, and whatever appropriate reverbs and delays that will allow things. Obviously extend it more to your preference based off of whatever you've written for. Setting up your theme settings first, in terms of just kind of getting ahead of the curve and avoiding any type of efficiency workflows in the future, and experiment with the transition presets. This is something actually that it will take the majority of the time to kind of nail down and get right. And when you do that, it will save you a lot of time in the long term, and it will just run very smoothly within Unreal or Unity or Godot, whatever game engine that you have already set up for the development project in itself. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to take them. We're in the QAA, I believe that we're going to do. But ADC, thank you again for this talk, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of the conference. All right, hello. And I hope you all enjoyed that. I've got some wonderful questions in the Q&A. If you have any questions from the talk, I'll be happy to answer them now. So we're going to get started. We have a question from Heather. She asks, what factors do you take into account when choosing one middleware, for example, Elias, over another, such as Wise or Fmod Studio? I'm actually smiling and laughing because the first example I'm going to give is, if you're familiar with experimenting with all of them, like I used Fmod before Studio was Fmod Designer, and I did start with that, and it was okay. And then I moved into Fmod Studio, and then I tried Wise. I played around with it at GameSongCon, and then I heard about Elias a little bit after. And so I've tried almost all of them. I'm still missing Cryware and Fabric, but what I really think is just basically what the talk was all about, how you think and what your thought process is like. So I'll give you an example. Fmod, it's relatively easy to kind of pick up on, but I'm not sure how the API is in terms of integration once it's used in the game engine mostly. So that's something to consider, because that's the whole purpose of it pretty much going together. And then with Wise, it's great, but their system of setups is something that I don't really personally connect with, and I'll tell you why. If you're ever explained of, oh, do you know my sisters, brothers, cousins, mothers, dogs, friends, that whole like parent type of hierarchy system, that doesn't work for my brain. So I don't use that because that's the system they're kind of using, is the whole like parent-child type of thing, and things are all over the place. With Elias, I can just understand vertical versus horizontal, and I can think about things in between. I know numbers, I know buttons, and that works for me. That's pretty much the real answer of it. So I appreciate the question. We've got a next one that is from Steve Baker. Is there anything in your workflow which is not optimal, which could be improved by the software, or something you wish you could do but can't? Yes, so I was mentioning this a little bit in the talk. I wish that I could do mix meter type of, because I write in a very eclectic form. And I think that they're working on this. They're speaking about Elias, the Elias team, they may be implementing that sooner. So if that's possible, this is really going to be a magnificent software for me to use going forward, because then if I want to transition in any type of cue, as we know, when writing, you're in 4/4, and then you're in 12/16, and then you're back to 6/8, and wherever that you want to be, there's some workarounds you kind of have to do. And in this case, what you have to think about is breaking up your bar length in terms of that chunk size, and then creating a different theme setting overall to implement with those levels and layers for them to be triggered. That was the technique that I had discovered using one of, what was that example? I think it was Man of Woods. It was earlier. It was more like between the mini game, if you had noticed, and then being outside and then being inside. So that's something I want to look forward to if they have it in the future. And a couple other things, I've got a list I've already been giving them the entire year. I could go on, but that's the main thing I'm thinking about the most, because that's the biggest hang up that I was having. Mental gymnastics for that one, at least in that time. And we've got another question. Let's see, let's go down here. So Heather asks again, could you expand more on why a Ranger track is better / more useful than markers? Okay, so in the beginning of the talk, I was speaking about the arranger track in Cubase. I did my best to demonstrate that it's functioning as Elias would early. And in markers, you can easily, you'll run out of numbers, but then you'll have to use your key with your quick keys in terms of the software. But in Cubase, you can have it do in any type of music form you want, and then you can set different chains. So you can have multiple chains, and you can test this theory. So for example, let's take a ternary form, right? So or let's ABA. So it's A, B, and A prime. You just like it was using in the talk. You have your A section. You write all your pieces that you want for the instruments to play in that level for that time. You select the bar out, and then you do your B section. Then you have your A prime, and you select them, and then you open up in the arranger track. And once you select it, it'll play what you are designing and what you've already kind of had to function to kind of think about what it's going to sound like with the mutes or transitions or whatever the case you've already set. With markers, you're going to have to put numbers in and do all that other stuff, but it's not going to be as efficient, and it's just not going to be as fast. And that's why I particularly choose to use the arranger track over the markers. The markers I still kind of help, because the more labeling you have, at least for me, the better, the more visuals, but that is just a press play and it does its own thing. It's automatic. Thank you for asking. The next question I have is from Robert. So with the game industry focusing more and more on adaptive music techniques, how do you think this will affect the business side of the composition's life cycle, like performance royalties or soundtracks? So for example, symphonic concerts like Zelda or Final Fantasy. So it's interesting. I actually did a concert like this live for my senior recital at Cal State Northridge. And I think that it's actually going to pull more people in, because it's going to have people be immersed. So for the composition I did, it's on YouTube, and I got to do an updated version of that performance, but it's there. I had someone play the games that I already scored at that time and play it live, and then I conducted the piece live where it was being played in those areas, and then I would transition. So it was almost like an adaptive concert. So I've already played around with this idea and actually tested it and did it. It was very stressful, but it was achievable, and I was the first to do it, and no one had ever done it before, at least at that college. And this is really what it's supposed to be designed to do, right? This is game music at its core and its meta form. And I only think that it's going to get better rather than just having the visuals play behind you in the orchestra or whatever concert performance is happening, whether it be electronic or the hybrid, it being in that regard. But it can go to the next level. And I've seen these type of concerts happen in college and not outside of that. So the experimentation is definitely there. It's definitely possible. And it's probably going, once we're obviously outside of lockdown and post COVID, best be beneficial to those type of organizations that do put on that type of show. I think it's going to be good. I really do. So we've got another question. And so this is from Dara. They ask, I assume Elias can be used in conjunction with Wise or Fmod. Is that correct? Elias using music for Wise. So no. So Elias is an audio middleware, Wise is an audio middleware, and Fmod is an audio middleware. You're going to choose one or the other. You can do everything. And in the latest Elias thing, I think that's coming out, you'll be able to finally do sound effects, but you were choosing your middleware. So they're all separate companies. So I just want to make that absolutely clear. And yeah, I think I ran through all the questions. If you have any more, please feel free to put them in the Q&A now. I'm happy to answer them. I'm not sure how much time we have left, but yeah, I'm usually doing most of
Chase,
these.
you got plenty of time. So if there are a few more questions, we could probably take easily just another 2 to 3 minutes of questions. And I would say maybe announce a floor and a table at Remo where folks can find you and speak to you some more.
Yeah, that sounds great. So, oh yeah, we got another question in from Nick. So, how does integration with the game runtime/editor actually work, i.e., the Wise sound banks? So, I would share my screen right now, but I don't want to interrupt the flow of it all because of just how technology kind of works. So, I'll do my best to explain. The integration work for Elias is if you go to the Elias website, you'll go to something that says like resources or something you're looking for an Elias dev kit. They offer it for Unreal and Unity. What you'll do is you'll download that dev kit. If you already have Unity installed on your computer or Unreal, whatever engine that you're, at least for, I'm going to use those two for the main example. Obviously, it's pre-installed. And what you'll do is you'll need to, like I was speaking about folders, set up a Unity project with that folder that you want to have that project in. You'll unzip the Elias dev kit because they already have a demo plugin ready for you to go with everything mostly set up for you to just change things out as you wish. And from there, you just double click the Unity plugin thing. If you have Unity open already, Unity will recognize it and it will say, hey, do you want to install this? You'll check the obvious things that you need to implement which I, in this case, suggest you import everything so that you can get familiar with how it's designed and how it works in Unity itself. And then it's actually pretty bare bones. So you're going to need a little bit of scripting knowledge in the future, or at least a programmer's help to kind of align it to the project that you need. Obviously, if you're on the paid project, then you're going to have to work with the license and stuff. But just for like fiddling around or game jams of that nature, you're probably going to be working with a programmer to make sure that they're one, setting up the scene if you don't know how to do it yourself, two, that you're in a specific prefab that's going to be for just audio testing only so that you can go crazy and go wild. But most of the time, you definitely want to focus on, like I mentioned, setting up your theme in Elias, getting your transition presets together. If you want to do level selection strategies, make sure you have that set up in transition settings or in your action presets, because in Unity, what's going to happen is you're going to have to type those in, and you need, like I said, you have to be organized to remember what those are, because they are not drop downs as they are in Elias. So you have to memorize or have them up or write them down what they are for the moment. Now you can script that in. That's what I was talking about. You might need a programmer, because I know with one project they were saying that they had what I already listed to know what they relate to in terms of connecting the collider to the event demo trigger in Elias. And then we can script in like a drop down, or in this case, as the bare bones as the plugin comes, you're just going to have to type it in. So that's typically how it works. It'd be better with visuals. I do stream most of this stuff on a few different channels on Twitch. One of them I will probably link at a table. I'll probably be at, I don't know which table I'm on Remo up right now, but it's easier to kind of find my face. I have like a little thing on there. So maybe let's say floor 1, floor 2, if there's availability, come find me and yeah, we can chat more about it. And maybe I can do a share screen there and remote. I think I can.